Rick is a long-time tourism ambassador for Vancouver. You all know Rick, so no need to remind you who he is and what he's done. I'm instead going to tell you a few things that you probably don't know about him.
Please.
Well, you probably don't. He's currently a member of the executive board of the Pacific Asia Travel Association based in Bangkok and vice president for the Pacific Coast Public Television. You might know that. You don't probably know that. He's the co-author of the bestseller Slew My Gold, In Search of a Legend, and author of the two Timbuktu for a Haircut, A Journey Through West Africa. His new book, Route 66, Still Kicks, is being released in September 2012. So I'm sure you didn't know that he was a writer. Rick was awarded an honorary doctorate from the Capilano University in 2011. He travels throughout the world for both business and pleasure. He's a true believer that tourism is a force for peace. He's also currently working on a cathedral project for the tourism industry in British Columbia. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome Rick Antonson, a friend and supporter of Lake Ledor.
Good evening, and thank you very much for having me by. I did have an opportunity at your invitation, I think probably a little over a year ago, to come and say a few words and answer some questions. And if that can work tonight, I'd take maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and then just before I turn it over to Keith, who actually, your wife's birthday is tonight, so you got a real short speech from him probably. What I'd like to do is also take any questions and then focus in on a couple of the specifics that any of you in this room may want me to. But I'll begin with echoing Tim Tyndall's comments about how those in this room help distinguish Vancouver. One of the things that's of the utmost importance in the highly competitive world of bringing visitors here is how we send them away, how they leave feeling about their experience. And you're in the absolute forefront of ensuring that when people are here and they think about the Vancouver experience when they're leaving, that it's not just been thorough and proper and most of what they wanted to do, but that they feel wonderful about it and that they leave talking about it. Because despite the millions of dollars that Tourism Vancouver might spend in marketing, or Tourism British Columbia, or the Canadian Tourism Commission, when it comes down to it, the most effective way of marketing is still word of mouth. And that's based on what people have felt, how they've maybe encountered problems and been able to work through them with the help of individuals like yourselves or some of your colleagues. And so on a day-to-day basis, when you're thinking about what you're going about doing and making happening, you're really very much a part of the future and the image of this industry. And I think when Tim used the word about distinguish Vancouver, that you're absolutely fundamental to that happening. And we're coming off of a couple of rather interesting years and good years. And as was just mentioned, in terms of cathedral thinking, something I'll speak a little bit about toward the end, that actually the reason the last 2 years came about and worked well was because of work done a dozen years ago or 20 years ago. The whole idea of having the Olympics here was, in fact, something that started in the 1960s. And at our annual general meeting for Tourism Vancouver, we recognized 4 of the individuals who back in the 60s and the 70s led the 2 earlier bids. I'll come back to the term about cathedral thinking, but what they saw was that somewhere down the road, it turned out to be 2010, this part of the world could host people from around the globe to the Olympics. And they tried twice with not successful bids that laid the very foundation for something that came about, and that was the Olympics in 2010. But many of the people that worked on those projects, the earlier bids of the Olympics, were not alive when we hosted the world for the 2010 games. Yet they believed in this part of the world, they believed in the destination, and they believed that the work they were doing would be terrific for people who hadn't yet immigrated to live here and work in our industry, to their grandchildren that hadn't yet been born. They had this vision of the longer term. And when I close my comments in about 10 or 15 minutes, I want to come back to how we all should today and in the coming few years be thinking what we can be doing for that type of long-term vision that enabled us to have a 2010 and a 2011 that came together as very strong, very effective years. It didn't work for everybody in our industry. There are parts of the transportation sector or some of the attractions or some of the restaurant business that wouldn't look back and say that 2010 and 2011 were particularly good for them. But by and large, we are coming off of 2 solid years. And those 2 solid years were not just good in terms of the number of visitors or the length of days that they spend in our city or how much money they actually put through our cash registers, but they were good in a different context. If you look around the world, these were not easy years for most of our competing destinations. Many pockets around the globe are having very difficult days. So when we say we came off of a couple of good years, the question gets begged right away, what about this one? What about 2012? What about the short term, 2013, 2014? And in fact, 2012 won't be as strong as 2011, won't be as strong as 2010, but it will be a good year. We're going to see increased travel from China, but we're not going to be seeing a lot of increased travel, say, out of Germany or Greece or Italy. We'll see increased travel out of Mexico, but that's increased over a pretty small base number of visitors. We'll see increased travel out of South Korea, but that's not on a really large number, so it doesn't boost us. But overall, visitation this year may be up by 2 percentage points. That means the number of visitors coming in and spending at least 1 night. It doesn't assure us that they're going to spend 2 or 3 or 4 nights, or they'll come here to Vancouver or Whistler as part of a 2-week vacation in British Columbia. It just means that they're going to be in our province and in the Metro Vancouver area, according to all of the forecasts. The US market traditionally stays home or tight and close during an election year, which they're going through in a very fractious way. Yet we see the US travel numbers starting to come back a bit, and we think that in the coming years we're going to see a bit of a very modest, but an increase. We have to remind ourselves that that comes on the heels of a number of years of a declining and softening. And our fellow Canadians, as with all of us working and getting a paycheck in Canada, our dollar this year goes further when we travel outside of the country than it did 4 years ago. So 4 years ago, the Canadian market, travel within Canada, was really quite good, in part because none of us could afford to go anywhere else unless we were on business and somebody else was helping shoulder the costs. And now Canadians can travel south of the border, can travel to Europe, can go on occasions, many occasions, outside of the country. So that market has softened. All that in, 2012 has a lot of strength because of the business at the Convention Center, which will anchor the year and is decent. I want to come back to that in a moment too, to talk about some of that recent controversy around the Convention Center. And while Disney Cruises was here last year and has left, and we want them back, Princess Cruises is coming in with a new ship for this year. We've got some new ports of call. So along with the consumer marketing and some of the strength out of the Australian market, which is going to be strong for us this year, we see a nice nudge up. Part of our job is, once the people are here, find a way to take their planned 1-night stay and make it 2 nights, the planned 2 or 3 day stay and make it 4 days or 5 days, and to get them to come back. It is something that advertising alone will not do. Marketing, tour operators, holding conventions doesn't do. Everyone in this room, all of us, have to work together to ensure that we have people returning and that when they leave here, they're a big part of attracting other people to us. I mentioned 2012 and I referenced quickly 13 and 14. 13 and 14 right now need a lot of work, and it's going to get that work. It'll get it from the Canadian Tourism Commission, it'll get it from Tourism Vancouver and Tourism Whistler and all of our partners and Tourism British Columbia. On the meeting side, both of those years in terms of business in the Convention Center are now in a shorter in booking cycle than they used to be. There was a time not many years ago when a year like 2013, a convention would have been booked for that year, perhaps in 2005 or 2006. Now a lot of the business that might come in 2013 or 2014 has yet to be booked. The Convention Center has a very aggressive program they're working on with ourselves. Claire Smith at the Convention Center is spearheading. It's aimed at the corporate business. It's called One Vancouver, and it's aimed at, between the hotels and the Convention Center, making it really easy for a corporation that wants to hold a sales conference or a product launch or a meeting of whatever nature, that we're a really easy city to book. So 2013 and 2014 will fill in. But I wanted to mention those years because you may have seen some of the CTV or global news coverage, or may have heard Bill Good's program yesterday morning. There was a member of the opposition, government opposition on the provincial level, who came out criticizing the convention center, and the heading, unfortunately, that ran the banner on the television interview on one of the stations said, "Bookings plunge." And the banter was, we've got an empty convention center. And of course, it's pretty easy to find a day if you just watch over the course of any week. You can find a day where you can walk in, and even if 2 levels are busy, you can go to the 3rd level, and you're bound to find a level where you can get an empty room shot. And that's what they did. And they ran what we think of as a spurious account, and they contacted us, and they said, we want to do an interview about the reduced business at the convention center. And they had some numbers of the bookings that were coming in 2012 and 2013 and 2014. And our first response was, where'd you get those numbers? They're inaccurate. Notwithstanding they were inaccurate, both the politician and the news media ran with the inaccurate numbers. And I did an interview on Bill Good yesterday morning and was asked response to this, and I said either they had the wrong information or they had the right information and just weren't intelligent enough to interpret it properly. But they willfully misconstrued it. So if you have heard in the media or seen anything that talks about plunging bookings as they bannered it, that in fact is inaccurate. The convention center is not just in a healthy position, but we are getting business for the convention center that could never come to Vancouver before, because we weren't large enough until there was the expansion. And many of the pieces of business that, and this is a credit to the hotel community, credit to the convention center, many of the conferences that have come that could never meet in Vancouver before because we didn't have the size of facility they needed, have already started to rebook. One, a very large conference that was here in 2010 has already rebooked for 2012. But here's the thing. Right now, the year 2015 looks like, for a variety of reasons, it will be the single best year for tourism ever in Metro Vancouver. And it will be anchored by citywide convention business. Already signed at the convention center, or a verbal definite, or on the tentative list with a very good prospect of converting into confirmed pieces of business. That'll anchor it. We're going to work to try and get Disney Cruises back here and continue to expand the cruise business. After years of the cruise business notching down because of Seattle's being very aggressive, Seattle's peaked out on the weekends. The reason Seattle grew their business was that Vancouver peaked out on weekend berths and had to move ships to midweek. They've now peaked out. Last year actually was double-digit increase in cruise business, Vancouver-Alaska cruise business, over the previous year. This year, it'll be up again. So there's much good news on the horizon. When we get to 2015, we could well enter an era where the world of turmoil that is economically besmirching all business plans and all forecasts may put us in an era between 2015 and 2020 that is just the right time to be in the tourism industry in the Metro Vancouver area or in British Columbia. But we're mindful that we have to be focused on selling and on selling and on selling. We have to book business for later on this year, for next year. It's got to be with the tour operators, it's got to be with the convention business. But we are going to have an easier time of it than our colleagues, our counterparts in most other destinations within this country, within North America, and other parts of the world. And we only need to look at the front pages of the newspapers or scanning the television to realize how much uncertainty there is out there. And to have a bit of stability and a bit of health is good. But they will be difficult times. They will require a lot of innovation. And as we've discussed when we had breakfast recently, we've watched your organization take an ever-increasing leadership role in the last couple of years and have a really strong profile and be listened to and be heard in a sort of in a new way and be part of the thinking and part of the strategic partnerships that are going forward. It's going forward in the long term that I want to come back and wrap a bit with, and then toss it open for some conventions, for some talking about either the conventions or our marketing or our organization or just the future, or hear some of the things from you. But when we talk about where we've been the last couple of years, which gives us a real solid plateau, we're high up the mountain, we can see quite a ways. We talk of the coming few years and then 2015 as something that if we all work together, we can make so special. And then that arc into 2020. I wanted to actually look over here at James Terry, because James was the chair of our board last year, and as well as being our board chair, he also chaired a process called Rethink. And Rethink was about asking big questions. And the first was, what is it we as a tourism industry in the Metro Vancouver area want to accomplish together by 2020? And then the sub-question that comes really big and right quick and fast after that is, what's that mean for destination marketing? Well, the big question led through a consultative process, lots of engagement, elected officials, non-elected officials, people running businesses, people owning businesses, people in the tourism industry. Ended up at our annual general meeting in the spring with James talking about where we go in the future, and it was that by the year 2020, Vancouver will be a world city. Think about that for a moment, and that quick response I often get is, well, we're already world class. But really, or that we're really well known, really. We are able to be found on a map by more people now than we could before the Olympics. But have we really entered yet that rarefied space up here that in the minds of the general public who aren't close physically to Vancouver would make them think of us as a world city? Because however you would define a world city, which could have a list of criteria, you know them when I mention them. If I say London, of course. Paris, of course. Hong Kong, of course. Sydney, yeah, quite possible. Barcelona, yes. World cities, they're there. And if Vancouver wants to reach that by 2020, we have a lot of work to do. Because a world city almost self-defines. And yes, it's about good service, and yes, it's about lots of things to do. But in a world city, there's so much happening that you don't have an average 2-day stay like in Vancouver. You have an average 5-day or 6-day stay, because there's that much. And the image right away is like, if I say New York or I say London, any time of the year, if you were talking to somebody going there, you right away know that they can easily fill 5 days, because they're in a New York, they're in a London. We need that reputation for Vancouver. Part of the way to get there is something that our board endorsed as a roll down of one of seven key things that came from James's presentation around the Rethink and going for the World City, is that we need a tourism master plan. And so we're going to be working with the City of Vancouver. We're going to work with a lot of our colleagues in the industry to actually put in place a master plan that respects that an organization like Tourism Vancouver is on the demand generation. We're trying to bring people there. We've got 9 million visitors this year. By 2015, we might have 11.6 million. We might grow that to 2020. Who's working on the supply side to make sure that we've got the zoning that enables restaurants, more hotels, whatever we need, the transportation infrastructure, so that, as my colleague in Melbourne said recently, if Melbourne and Vancouver are two of the world's most livable cities, what do we have to do to be two of the world's most visitable cities? And it wasn't a term that I'd heard before, but it resonates, because if you look at the reasons, top 4 or 5 reasons why people visit here, they parallel the top 4 or 5 reasons why we've chosen to live here. That's a happy set of circumstances. Cathedral thinking, as you kindly mentioned in the introduction, Stefan, it's hands up if you're familiar with the term cathedral thinking, because then I wouldn't bother explaining it. Good, I feel better already. My wife lives in Edinburgh, in Scotland, and we were on Christmas Eve in a cathedral that is 200 and some odd years old. In Europe particularly, there is a term about cathedral thinking that I think parallels the work of those who launched the first 2 Olympic bids that led to the 3rd bid, which was successful, which led to 2010. In cathedral thinking, it is true that often the designer, the architect of a huge cathedral, never lives to see their design completed. The stonemason that puts the cornerstone in place, that begins laying the very foundation, may be the grandfather or the great-grandfather of the person that works on the spire. Cathedral thinking is about doing today meaningful things that are part of a vision that will not be realized until you're passing. It's a willingness to work hard on things because it will contribute today to getting us to where we need to be down the road. The Vancouver Airport has a 2032 plan. The Vancouver Port has a 2050 plan. The tourism industry now has a 2020 plan. We just booked a convention to 2021. That's outside the plan. So when one thinks as a cathedral thinker, one takes responsibility that whatever our job is, it is part of delivering on something that those who take our jobs from us in a succession, or those who replace us for whatever reason, or our colleagues, or our children, or our grandchildren, or those of our colleagues, will actually be building on, that it's not happenstance. Betty Fadda, who many of you may know, once said that in the tourism industry, for most people, the long-range plan is their day timer. We've got to do better than that, and the tourism industry is usually pulled up short. We've been very short-range in our thinking. But as those who worked in the 1950s and 1960s to lay the very base of our successful 2010 hosting of the world for the Olympics, they were cathedral thinkers. And we owe it to future generations, that all of us in this room, and under leadership of people like James Terry as our board chair, and Howard Jang, our current board chair, that we in fact are all cathedral thinkers. I thank you for this opportunity to come here tonight to say a few things and throw out a few ideas. I'd be happy if we have time to answer a few questions, and then I'll get out of your way. Yes, please.
Mexicans, you say there's increased market of the Mexicans.
Yes.
Does that mean that they're going to ease up on the visas from the Mexicans coming to Canada?
You know, the federal government, for those, just so everybody's heard the question, with the increased travel from Mexico, will this mean an easing up on the visas? Because when the government decided to clamp down, they did it literally overnight, and it was a real mess, and it was very problematic. And people about to board a plane who literally couldn't board a plane. So there are a number of things that have been in place. First of all, they've supplemented the resources so that they can process them more quickly. They've looked at multiple entry visas and longer stay visas, and those are some of the modifications that have been there. For security reasons, they have said that they're not going to go back to there being no visa, but it's like other aspects of the trusted traveler passages that we can now see over many borders. There's a possibility of an increase on that. And the Mexican market's very important to us, and many of them require partnerships from us on the marketing. A lot of the market out of Mexico, or say Brazil, would not travel all the way here for 2 nights in Vancouver. They'll come all this way for a week in Whistler, and then they'll tag on a night or two here. It's like many of the travelers from Germany, they just wouldn't come all this way for 2 days in Vancouver. It's not worth it. They'll come this way for 3 weeks so they can spend a week in the Rockies and a week in the Caribou. We might get them for a couple of days, but we're part of that. One of the main reasons people visit Vancouver is to leave us. We've got one of the world's best backyards, and it's called British Columbia. Yes?
Hannah in Seasons Whistler. First of all, the cathedral thinking is a fantastic thing, and I have an example from Czech Republic. There's a cathedral, St. Peter's Cathedral. They started building it in 14th century. It was only finished at the beginning of 20th century. Spans over several architectural styles. Even the grandchildren of the people that started it thought of that, went around at that time. So it's fantastic. Wonderful. I hope that we don't need to wait centuries for all this come to fruition, but it's fabulous and it works. It's a jewel. Coming from Eastern Europe, I know that we are focusing on China and Korea and Asia as a market, but if you travel in Europe, Switzerland and France and Portugal and Switzerland and Spain, the language that you hear the most is actually Russian. And I was wondering if we are looking into that market, because if Russians come all that way, as you say, they don't stay 2 days, 3 days, they do stay 2 weeks. And they fly on helicopters and they spend the money, and they are actually fabulous guests to have. So are we focusing in that direction as well?
It's not a priority market now, and part of that is limited resources to deploy as much as possible. The travelers from Italy are are treasured. They spend a lot of time, but even the Canadian Tourism Commission only has so many resources they can put into a market like that. So the concentration in Europe has been around Germany and around France, particularly for Eastern Canada, of course, but some for here. The UK, concentration on England and on Scotland, and the Netherlands. So it's a part of how much is left over at the end that you have in the way of resources that you can deploy. But we've met with tour operators to service the Russian market, because the important thing is that, you know, if you can lead the shepherds, you have to worry less about the sheep. So it's identifying the shepherds in each of the countries. So we and Tourism BC and the CTC work a lot with tour operators in each of the countries. So in Russia, there are a number of tour operators who sell the Canada product and represent it. It doesn't have the presence that we would like to see yet, and a lot of the travel outside of Russia has in fact been to Europe or some of it to the Middle East. But as that expands, it could be a huge market for us. And I think you hit it right there. It's like the travelers from Japan, particularly in the early 90s, they were really curious. They cared about Indigenous peoples, wanted to spend their money, and they came for a week or longer. Russia has a very nice profile, welcome visitors, but it's finding the marketing resources to put behind what is still a secondary or tertiary market.
Thank you.
But I think Sharon has a question.
As you mentioned, a person from Germany would travel to the Caribou or other places. How does Tourism Vancouver, or what is its scope or focus compared to Tourism BC? Because everybody has tourism, whether it's Tourism Whistler, Tourism Kelowna. What is the focus between the two, especially with BC when it would be everything?
Tourism Vancouver works hard to align with Tourism British Columbia or the Canadian Tourism Commission. Sometimes one of them will lead and we will follow, we will support. Other times we lead and they would follow, they would support us. Much like on convention bids, we work really closely with the convention center. Sometimes the convention center sales staff take the lead and we're in a supportive role. Sometimes we take the lead, say through our office in Washington, D.C. or in Chicago, and they support us. And it's the same thing on the leisure travel or the tour operator market. So Tourism British Columbia has to represent the entire province. We have the luxury of focusing on the icon and on what truthfully is the name recognition. Because if you ask people about British Columbia, the further afield you go, the fewer of them would actually know the name British Columbia, and that it's not next to British Guiana or something like that. It doesn't have that marketing penetration. Vancouver, and the Olympics were truly helpful on this. Vancouver is one of the higher recognized brands in terms of destinations. So we have a lead role that we can take sometimes. Tourism British Columbia works very closely with us, but in, say, working with tour operators, we would be the ones pushing for 2 pages in their promotional brochure on Vancouver. Whereas, say, Tourism British Columbia would be happy to see the 2 pages on British Columbia. We want them both on Vancouver and work with Tourism BC to see an extra 2 pages on the rest of the province. But we are very close. We have a memorandum of understanding signed with Tourism Whistler. We're very closely with them. We actually work with Seattle Tourism and on the leisure travel side. A little bit on the meeting side. Tom Norwalker is my counterpart, who used to be with the Four Seasons in Vancouver as Director of Sales many years ago. Tom and I ripped one another's hearts out for a good piece of convention business. But on the leisure travel, when you're looking at Northern California drive market, by the time they get here, they've either gone through Seattle or bypassed on the I-5. Why not work together on trying to create an impression of here and Whistler and Victoria? So a lot of cooperation. We've had a lot of successes as Tourism Vancouver. There isn't one thing we've ever done on our own. Nothing. And sometimes it's been a success that we've shared with 3, 4, 5 other organizations. Yeah.
One last question, Raymond?
Yeah, I'm Raymond Wong from Hermitage Hotel. I just wanted to inquire, how does the competition, I think you may have just answered it, with Seattle, because Seattle, we seem to be losing some of the cruises, but we seem to also have a weakness with the airlines, because we see a lot of the European airlines, Air France, SAS, Emirates coming into Seattle, and we lose Singapore Airlines. I'm just wondering, what is the strategy with regard to that? Are we working really with Seattle, or kind of working kind of separately, or
On air service,
air
on air service development?
As well as, you know, cruise ship business and all. I'm not exactly sure sometimes when it comes to that.
We don't want to cooperate with them on cruise ship business. We want it back here, and we'll do everything we can to snooker them on that. On air service development, cutthroat. And our difficulty, we've seen air service development increase with last year, China Southern, Virgin's announced they're coming here. We work with those airlines and YVR, the airport authority, on building business and trying to make sure that they're not just new routes that are launched, but sustainable and that they last for many years. So one of the things that hampers us as Vancouver is the federal aviation policy in this country. And it is favorable to Ontario and to Quebec. Singapore Airlines was here 3 days a week. They wanted to come 7 days a week. They could not get permission. They had a vice president of their airline based here. We lobbied with them. They lobbied. They eventually left out of frustration because the federal government wouldn't ease it up. YVR wanted it. We wanted it. We had hotel community support, lots of lobbying. Emirates wanted to fly here. We always used to think if we could just get the public and the politicians to understand the Emirates issue, that all this ignorance would disappear and they would be able to fly here. What happened was, of course, that the Canadian government had to move the military base in a controversy that was driven by Emirates Airlines because they couldn't get the routings here that they wanted. So anybody that strings words together and reads the newspaper, watches the evening news, became aware of the Emirates issue. It did not change federal policy. Air France wanted to fly here and on to Tahiti years ago. They couldn't. They went into Seattle. Emirates is in Seattle. So we cannot get the low-cost U.S. airlines to come in here. We'd like them. That said, we've got Air Canada as a great strength, and they ban the world. And so we've got that. Air Canada is a great partner of ours. Air Canada itself has said that it would support some more open skies relationships and a more liberal approach in exchange for them themselves being able to, as our national carrier, represent this country on a more level playing field in some of those other countries where their national governments have a bit of favoritism towards, say, their national carrier, where we'd like to see Air Canada have routes and have increased frequency. So it's a complicated approach, but sitting out here in the West, it probably won't surprise you to hear that we feel that there's a national aviation policy that's a bit more favorable to Central Canada than indeed some of the airlines, like an Air Canada and ourselves, would like to see favorable here to Vancouver. The world wants to come, we've got to make it easy for them to get here.
Great, thank you, Rick. I don't know if you like cooking, but
Excellent. Thank you for Okay. Thank you very much. I don't mean to be rude. I've got to